With that said, colleagues, moving to our facilitator, Glenn Retief will be facilitating the part 3 of our knowledge sharing session. Basically, Glenn grew up in South Africa during the apartheid era. Glenn holds a doctorate in writing from Florida State University. He is the Jack Bank. Basically, he wrote a memoir focusing on South African childhood in April 2011 when it was published. He also won a Lambda Literary Award and was further selected as an Africa Book Club of 2011 as well. Glenn has published work in journals including the Kenyon Review, the Yale Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, and New Contrast, as well as short personal essays in newspapers and magazines like the New Republic, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Also to highlight that Glenn writes regular literary journalism, which we can regard it as a slice of life, articles for the South African Daily Maverick. He teaches creative nonfiction at Susquehanna University, I guess I got it right, where he directed the undergraduate creative writing program until 2019. Furthermore, from 2021 to 2022, he served as a U.S. Fulbright scholar in Mamelodi, South Africa, where his research and teaching focused on using peer feedback and support to improve academic and professional writing skills. With that said, within the interest of time, Glenn, let me hand over to you. The floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sholofelo. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you once again for coming today and for joining what I hope will be an interactive and profitable session. A huge thank you and congratulations to Caslin for for the changes in your life, and thank you for all of your help so far. And Sholo, thank you so much for taking over and facilitating the series from here. Can I have the first slide? Okay.
All right, it should be coming up, Glenn.
Okay.
Right.
Great. So today's session is called Writing Community and Peer Critique, and it's session 3 of Good Writing in Government. That should be a comma in front of a series of workshops. Can I have slide 2? So I'm going to give just a little bit of background content very quickly today, because I'd like us to spend most of the session actually doing peer critique and feedback. But when we think of writing, often we think of the myth of the lone rugged writer, and I have a picture there of a cowboy, the lone cowboy, and I say in my slide, cowboys, hard-drinking detectives, Jedi Knights, and writers. Is this how we think of writers and writing? You know, when I think of the myth of the lone rugged writer, I think of J.D. Salinger, the author of Catcher in the Rye, who after his success with Catcher in the Rye disappeared into a secret cavern in New England and wrote many more pages, but hid them all away and didn't show them to anybody. And so there was this great exotic mystery about this lone writer hidden away in his cabin. Or I think of Emily Dickinson penning her poems alone and hardly seeing anyone. Our culture tends to love this picture of the writer. We prefer the solitary writer and the intellectual, solitary writer intellectual to the collaborative one. We prefer to think of individual brilliance. And I think above all, we so love stories of incredible writing talent, of inspiration, and of magical first drafts. We love thinking of writers just producing from their own genius or their own minds these incredible pieces of writing. That's much more glamorous and exciting and indeed magical for us than perspiration. inspiration is more interesting to us than perspiration, and magical first drafts are much more interesting to us than rewriting and rewriting and rewriting. But the truth is that writing rarely gets done the second way, not the first way. It's more like building a table than just producing some kind of work of extreme genius or beauty. There's good news in this, which is that the myth that only some people can write. If you don't have talent, if you don't have the gift of writing, then you can't write. That's just a complete myth as well. Just about anybody can learn to write, and just about anybody can improve. Some people are better writers than others, but mostly this is practice and hard work, not natural talent. Can I have the next slide? So I said, contrary to myth, writers like mountain climbers work better in groups. When we look at social psychology research, I won't go into a lot of detail today, but even with something like mountain climbing, they have found that when people climb together in groups and when they divide up tasks, a group of mountain climbers can climb a mountain much more quickly than the slowest person in that group would be able to climb alone. And in general, when human beings are given big tasks, they tend to tackle those tasks much more quickly and much more effectively if they have a support group for tackling that task. This we just know, it's social psychology 101. And almost all professional writers join groups. I'm a member of the Authors Guild in the United States. I'm a member of NWASA, the National Writers Association of South Africa. I'm a member of PEN, South Africa. And my slide has vanished. Okay, there it is. It came back. Can we go back a slide? So, professional writers make use of editors. We hire our own editors for help, and then we also work with acquiring editors. These are the editors at publishing houses that buy manuscripts. We make use of peer critique groups and of beta readers and focus groups, all serving different purposes. Publishing is, of course, a gigantic collaboration, which you all know from Gtac. For you to publish your work requires a lot of people involved. And then writing programs, training programs like the one that I work in, try to instill writing community and literary citizenship. We try to teach our students to work together and not to try to always work alone. So three different kinds of writing relationships. The editor, or I think quality assurer at Gtac, ensures accuracy and professionalism, protects the reputation of the institution or the team, and does to some extent try to bring out writers' best work. So there's some element of a coach in the quality assurer sometimes, but the quality assurer's primary responsibility is the quality of the product, not to help the writer. So that's a very important relationship, but it's not, this is not the person who's going to necessarily help you become a better writer, because this person is just focused mostly on the product, and that's their job. So focus groups, and we'll see whether Gtac does anything like this. Sometimes you can test the impact of a piece of writer, and for professional writers like myself, we call these beta readers. But this is to help us build awareness of our audience, who we're writing for and how they respond. It's to test run the impact of a piece of writing. It's to see how is this going to land on the type of people that I'm writing for. It is also an opportunity to build support for the institution. For example, if Gtac were to create focus groups of some of the readers of its WhatsApp newsletters, then those people could become supporters of Gtac, but then also provide feedback from the point of view of the audience. So these are two different writing relationships: the quality assurer and then focus groups. Can I have the next slide? Can I have the next slide? Okay, I seem to have some difficulty. Okay.
What's happened?
Okay. My load shedding just started now, but I've switched on. Sorry about that.
Hi, good afternoon, Glenn.
Good afternoon, Renette.
How are you?
Well, thanks. How are you?
Fine, thanks. I wish I was in this group from the beginning. It sounds very, very interesting. I hope everybody is enjoying the sort of esteemed guest that we've got here, people. Glenn, I'm very glad that we are able to have you in this Gtac space. And I really like the starting position that everybody can learn to write. You know, if you can string two words together, you might not become, you know, Emily Bronte, but you will be a writer. And I think it's very true. And I think it's quite a privilege to be taken through this process by you. Does anybody else have the slides? Is it only Tsolo that has the slides?
I can bring them up.
I think maybe that's going to be the easiest.
Oh, here we go.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Okay, so if we can go to the next one, Charlotte. So, you know, the third type of relationships, what I think is maybe the most important, which are peer writing relationships. This is a safe space. Usually it would not be your boss or the quality assurer who's reading the writing at this stage. It'll be somebody with whom you can show completely messy and inadequate writing, like all writers. Even Emily Bronte wrote very badly for her first drafts. So it's a place where you can safely show very bad writing. Crucially, the focus with your peer, when you show your writing to your peer, the focus can be on developing the writer and building motivation. It doesn't have to be, you know, the piece of writing is mostly a means to an end. You will talk about the piece of writing, but the main goal is to help each other become better writers. The peer is not responsible for the quality of the writing, so the peer is free to offer feedback and encouragement just with a view to helping their peer grow as a writer. And somebody else, the quality assurer, is responsible for the quality of the final product. So people often think with peer writing, well, you know, I'm such a bad writer, nobody's going to want to have me give feedback on their writing because, you know, it'll be the blind leading the blind if they ask me to give feedback. So that's another one of these myths, a little bit like the myth of individual genius or writing talent. You don't have to be a fabulous writer to give good feedback. You just need to read attentively and pay attention to what is clear, what is unclear. You know, as with the peer groups that we talked about before, just being a potential audience for the piece of writing is already so helpful. So peers give better feedback than it is generally imagined. And then when you have more than one person that you're showing it to, you can discern patterns of response and feedback. So if you're showing it to one person and they say something and you as the writer think, that doesn't make any sense to me. But then, you know, 3 people say the same thing to you. Then you maybe, you know, if it's just one person, you can maybe kind of dismiss it as just their thing. But if larger numbers of people all say the same thing to you, that's a way of building credibility, and it's also a way of building reliability into peer feedback. Is if you just show it to one person, that's more risky than showing it to 3 people. If you show your piece of your writing to 3 people, you can get sort of a patterns of response. One last note just on peer relationships. To proofread, I suggest that proofreading can be a bit of a distraction in the peer writing workshop. The purpose of peer writing workshop is really to figure out what am I doing well, not doing well as a piece of writing in a piece of writing and as a writer. How can I get this writing better? How can I develop myself better? So, you know, to be focused so much on commas and question marks and is it an M dash or an N dash, that can be a bit of a wasted opportunity. Next week, we're going to talk about appropriate use of writing software to proofread. So, you know, I think you have to know how to use the software, but once you've been trained to do that, you know, let the robots help you with your commas. That's definitely one option. Or reading aloud is another option. Or a third one is getting a proofreader. You know, if your spouse is a very good proofreader or your colleague is a very good proofreader, just get help with. Does everybody know what proofreading means? Proofreading is when you read for a mistake with the comma or a mistake with spelling or a mistake with quotation marks. It's you know, proofreading is when you check a piece of writing for correctness, for grammatical, spelling and punctuation correctness. So my suggestion is to separate that as much as possible from peer critique. These are similar things, but a little bit different. Next slide, please. I think for reasons of time, again, I'm going to save this for our final session, but I am interested to know what kinds of writing communities exist at Gtac and National Treasury and what works well for you and what doesn't. Like I said, we'll have a final session where we talk about the sort of the nuts and bolts of the institutions and programs. And I think let's discuss that question in session 5. So can we have the next slide? So qualities of healthy writing communities, healthy peer critique groups, they have to be honest. If you're going to lie to protect the feelings of the person that you're talking to, you're not helping them become a better writer. You can say, oh, this is wonderful, I love it. And if you really don't, that's not helping them at all. They're not going to learn from that. So honesty is crucially important, but with it comes supportiveness. Really, this is, if you remember one thing from today's presentation, remember that when people are commenting on each other's writing, the two helpful things are honesty and supportiveness. If one of those things is missing, if the tone and the feeling of the feedback is not supportive, it's going to become emotionally unsafe for the writer. The writer will not ever want to get feedback again because they'll feel this harsh judgment and it'll be too scary. On the flip side, if the feedback is not honest, the person is going to be misled and is not going to. And this is the art of peer feedback, is being both honest and supportive at the same time. And then specifically, I wanted to say being able to focus more on the writer you want to help than how the prose makes you feel. Sometimes in the kind of classes that I teach, people get very frustrated with each other's writing. The writing is confusing. You know, as a reader, you want to understand what the person's trying to understand or trying to say, but you can't understand it, and then you get frustrated, and then your voice gets loud, and you express your frustration, and then without meaning to, you make the writer feel like they did something terribly wrong because they frustrated you as a reader. And then that gets back into, you know, people not feeling safe, not feeling confident enough to share their writing, because if my writing frustrated you so much, then I don't want to frustrate you, so I'm going to withdraw from the writing community rather than participate in it. So I think just always focus on how to help the writer, and then finally, whenever you offer praise and criticism, if you can give specific examples. Some of you might have remembered last week in the pieces that we discussed, I would always ask, what words here make this seem jargonistic? Are there specific words, that seem jargonistic? It's very useful criticism to say about a piece of technical writing that this seems jargonistic, but what specific words? The writer may not know. The writer may have intended to write something that wasn't jargonistic, but then despite themselves, they became jargonistic. So if you say to them, this is jargonistic, but you don't say which words or which specific sentence structures and so on seemed too jargonistic, then they're not going to really know what to do with the criticism or praise. It'll be like, oh gosh, I didn't think this was jargonistic. Is it jargonistic? Why? So being able to be specific about which words, which sentences and so on. And then also with criticism, if you say this is wonderfully conversational, then ditto. So questions for peer workshop. I have 3 questions for you today. Given the purpose, what about this writing works best? We always want to say something that's working well. Otherwise, the person feels like they're a complete loser, and there's no potential in this piece of writing. We always want to offer some suggestion for improvement. How might this writing be improved? If you say to somebody else, "This is just perfect," that's great, but then they're not learning or improving. We always want to help each other improve. So, if humanly possible, if you really can't think of anything to improve, then you just say that. But if humanly possible, something that's working well, something that might be improved. And then this goes back to what I was saying about grammar and about separating proofreading from peer feedback. Only point out typos if they are really big, or if they affect the meaning, or if you think that the person might miss them otherwise. This is not a peer workshop is not a time to point out every mistake. So then the third question is, what questions do I still have as a reader at the end? So 3 questions. What works? What can be improved? And what questions do I still have at the end? What do I still want to know about? Okay, can we have next slide? So we were going to give you a little example of the workshop, but we actually did that last week because we discussed a few pieces of writing as a larger group. So in the interest of time and avoiding repetition, I just wanted to ask if there were any questions from last week. You saw Elaine's piece of writing that we discussed at some length, and then also Pitso's. We were a little bit more pressed for time with that one. But with those 2 pieces of writing and the way we talked about it, we answered those 3 questions that I talked about. What works, what doesn't, and what questions do you still have? And you kind of saw how we did that. You saw how we had that conversation. Are there any questions about what we did last week, or any questions about doing the same for each other in a couple of minutes from now? And feel free to just raise your hand or just unmute and jump in.
Okay, colleagues, if you have any questions, can you just indicate?
Well, I should say, any questions about what has been presented so far? Okay, Joel, I think that means everybody's happy.
Yeah.
Is there a question?
No, I guess if there isn't any question or hand, we can move along. Thanks,
Yeah.
Glenn.
All right. So, Cholo, at this point, we'll break up into groups of 3. And what I asked everybody to bring along for today was just a paragraph or so of a piece of writing that they would like to get improved. And we'll do our best that we can with the limited time today. But we're going to break up into sessions, and then each person should share a paragraph. We'll go around taking turns. So you'll be in a group of 3 people. Now, I'm looking at the time here. So I think we need 3 people in a group. So, if we can do like about 7 minutes or so for each person, and I'm thinking roughly a paragraph, thinking like roughly 100 to 200 words is what I asked you to bring today, but a piece of writing that you would like to see improved. So let's say there's, let's say Alaris and Benedicta and Benjamin would be in a group. Maybe Benedicta would go first, and she would read, or they would read the paragraph or 2 that they want improvement on, and then the others, Benjamin and Alaris, would then say what worked well, what can be improved, and what questions do we still have. And then when you finish, somebody should time about 7 minutes, and then after that Benedicta would go, and then after that Benjamin would go. So 3 people would go, and it may be like 5 minutes for each one, 5 to 7 minutes for each one. And then for the last 5 or so minutes, I'd just like us to get together again. So at I think 4:25 or so your time, just get together for a final check-in. Okay, so any questions about the assignment, which is the peer workshop, which we're going to do in breakout groups? Does everybody know what we're going to be doing?